There is a paradox in manifestation that almost no one talks about. The more techniques people learn to manifest something, the harder it often becomes to experience it. Vision boards, affirmations repeated 3 times a day, moon rituals, scripting exercises, gratitude journals, detailed visualizations. The list keeps growing. And yet, for many people, reality doesn't move. The relationship doesn't shift. The opportunity doesn't arrive. The financial situation stays the same. Eventually, a strange feeling begins to appear. Not just frustration, something deeper. The feeling of doing everything right, and still sensing that something essential is missing. Some time ago, a woman described exactly this experience. She had fully immersed herself in manifestation practices. Her mornings began with rituals. She wrote her intentions with gold ink, created vision boards, repeated affirmations in the mirror, practiced scripting methods taught by different manifestation teachers. And for a while it felt like progress, at least mentally. But in her physical life, nothing really changed. Gradually, her energy began to feel strange, not exactly blocked, just hollow, as if she was constantly reaching for something that remained slightly out of reach. Then, one afternoon, something unexpected happened. She was walking through a park. No practice, no affirmations, no spiritual routine, just walking. For the first time in a long time, her mind was quiet. And in that silence, something unusual occurred. A thought appeared. It didn't feel like it came from her mind. It felt like it moved through her. The sentence was simple, but it changed everything. You've been trying to manifest from the frequency of not having. She stopped walking, and suddenly everything made sense. Every affirmation she repeated carried a hidden undertone of urgency. Every vision board quietly whispered the same message: you're not there yet. Every intention came from a place of separation, from the feeling that what she wanted still existed somewhere outside of her. And in that moment, she realized something most people never notice. She wasn't manifesting the reality she wanted. She was reinforcing the reality where she didn't yet have it. That was the day she stopped trying. And something curious began to happen. Things started showing up. Not magically, but naturally. As if something inside her field had finally aligned. And this story reveals a principle that both ancient mystics and modern quantum thinkers quietly point toward. The field does not respond to your words. It responds to the clarity of your signal. And most people are not transmitting clarity. They are transmitting noise. We have been taught that manifestation is complicated, that it requires discipline, techniques, strategies, and constant mental effort. But what if that complexity is exactly what keeps reality from shifting? What if the real power of manifestation lies in something far simpler? In quantum mechanics, there is an idea that fascinates both scientists and philosophers. Reality does not appear because the observer tries to control it. Reality appears when the observer becomes coherent enough to interact with it. And coherence does not emerge from obsession. It emerges from stillness. But most people are not practicing stillness. They are practicing spiritual pressure. They want something so intensely that their field becomes unstable. The mind fills with strategies. The heart fills with doubt. The signal becomes distorted. And the quantum field, which mirrors your most stable frequency, reflects that distortion right back to you. This is the paradox. The harder you try to manifest something, the further it often seems to move away. Not because the universe is testing you, but because effort itself carries a hidden message. I don't have it yet. And in the quantum field, that message becomes your reality. But when the noise disappears, the signal finally becomes clear. And once the signal becomes clear, reality begins to reorganize. Most people believe manifestation fails because they are not doing enough. Not enough affirmations, not enough visualization, not enough discipline. So they respond the only way they know how. They add more techniques, more routines, more spiritual practices. But very few people stop to ask a more important question. What if the problem is not doing too little, but doing too much? Over the last decade, manifestation has slowly become something strange. What was once described as a natural interaction between consciousness and reality has turned into a long list of methods that people feel obligated to follow. Morning routines, night routines, scripting routines, visualization protocols, emotional checklists, tracking signs, watching for synchronicities, correcting thoughts, correcting emotions, trying to maintain the right vibration every hour of the day. And while these practices are often introduced with good intentions, something subtle begins to happen when too many layers are added. Instead of creating clarity, they create interference. Imagine trying to tune a radio. You slowly move the dial, searching for a specific station. At first, there is only static, then fragments of sound, a voice, half a melody, another signal crossing through. If your hand keeps moving the dial constantly, you never actually lock onto the station. You only experience fragments. This is exactly what many people are doing energetically. They ask the universe for clarity, while broadcasting confusion. They want love, but internally feel unworthy. They want financial abundance, but constantly rehearse fears about lack. They want peace, but their mind never stops analyzing outcomes. So their signal becomes unstable, and the quantum field responds in the only way it can. It reflects the signal it receives, not the words, not the intention written in a journal, the signal. This is where an important distinction appears. The field does not respond to effort, it responds to coherence. Coherence means your thoughts, emotions, and identity are transmitting the same message. Not 5 different messages, not 10. 1. Clear, stable, consistent. But when manifestation becomes a long list of techniques, something interesting happens. People stop focusing on coherence and start focusing on performance. They begin asking themselves questions like, am I visualizing correctly? Am I feeling the emotion strongly enough? Did I repeat the affirmation enough times? Did I miss a step? And slowly, manifestation stops being an energetic alignment and becomes a mental task, a project, something to manage, something to control. But the quantum field does not respond to control, it responds to resonance, and resonance only appears when the signal becomes simple enough to stabilize. This is why many mystics throughout history pointed toward stillness rather than technique. Not because practices are useless, but because the moment practices create pressure, they distort the signal. And a distorted signal cannot collapse reality clearly. So the real question is not, what technique should I add? The real question becomes, what noise needs to disappear? Because the moment the noise fades, coherence appears naturally. And once coherence appears, the observer effect begins to operate in a very different way. Because reality, at the quantum level, is not waiting for your effort. It is responding to your state. And that brings us directly to one of the most misunderstood ideas in quantum mechanics: the role of the observer. In quantum mechanics, one idea continues to fascinate both scientists and philosophers. Reality does not exist in a fixed form until it is observed. Before observation, particles exist as probabilities, possibilities, potential outcomes. Physicists call this state superposition. In simple terms, the universe at its most fundamental level behaves less like solid matter and more like a field of possibilities waiting to be expressed. Only when observation occurs does the wave of probabilities collapse into a specific outcome. This is known as the observer effect. But here is where most interpretations of manifestation become misleading. Many teachings suggest that intention alone collapses reality, as if thinking about something strongly enough forces the universe to deliver it. But that interpretation is incomplete, because observation is not just about attention, it is about coherence. The observer does not collapse reality through effort. The observer collapses reality through stability of signal. Imagine again the metaphor of tuning a radio. A station does not appear because you try harder. It appears when the dial reaches the exact frequency where the signal becomes clear. Not almost clear, not fluctuating, clear, stable, locked. Consciousness works in a similar way. When your internal state is unstable, your signal moves constantly between frequencies. Part of you feels confident. Another part feels doubtful. Part of you imagines the desired reality. Another part mentally rehearses why it might not happen. And because of this fluctuation, the signal never stabilizes. It becomes energetic static. So instead of collapsing a clear outcome, the field continues reflecting mixed probabilities. Fragments of progress, moments of synchronicity, small signs, but never full alignment. Not because reality is resisting you, but because your signal has not stabilized long enough to lock into a specific timeline. This is why many people feel like manifestation works sometimes. They experience brief moments of coherence, moments where their thoughts, emotions, and identity align naturally. During those moments, the signal becomes clear, and reality responds. But when the mind returns to doubt, urgency, or control, the signal begins shifting again, and the alignment dissolves. The quantum field is not responding to isolated thoughts. It is responding to your most stable emotional frequency, the state you return to most often, the identity you inhabit most consistently. This is why people who manifest effortlessly often appear calm. They are not constantly adjusting their signal. They are not anxiously checking if the process is working. They have stabilized into a frequency, and that stability allows reality to collapse around it. But there is another layer to this that makes the process even more interesting, because the greatest interference in the signal does not come from the outside world. It comes from something happening inside your own field, something physicists describe with a term that sounds technical, but explains a deeply human experience: decoherence. And once you understand how decoherence works in a quantum system, you begin to understand why so many manifestation attempts dissolve before reality ever has the chance to reorganize. To understand why manifestation often feels unstable, we need to look at a concept from quantum physics known as decoherence. In simple terms, decoherence happens when a quantum system loses its internal unity. Instead of behaving as one coherent state, the system becomes entangled with too many external influences. The signal that was once clear begins to fragment. Interference appears. The system loses the stability required to produce a clear outcome. In physics, this is why delicate quantum states are difficult to maintain in laboratory environments. The moment too many external variables interact with the system, coherence collapses. Now consider the human experience. You are also a system. Not just biologically, but energetically. Your thoughts, emotions, expectations, and beliefs create a field of information that interacts with reality. When these elements are aligned, the signal becomes coherent. But when too many internal contradictions appear, the system destabilizes. And this is exactly what happens in most manifestation attempts. A person may visualize abundance while simultaneously worrying about bills. They may affirm love while internally replaying memories of rejection. They may imagine success while fearing judgment or failure. Each of these emotional signals pulls the field in a different direction. The result is vibrational interference, not because something outside is blocking the outcome, but because the internal system has lost coherence. In quantum terms, the signal has decohered. The observer is no longer transmitting a unified frequency. Instead, multiple competing states are broadcasting at the same time. And when that happens, reality cannot collapse into a clear result. It continues reflecting probabilities, partial signals, incomplete movement. This is why people often experience small signs but not full transformation. A new opportunity appears, but disappears quickly. A promising relationship begins, then fades. Money arrives briefly, then instability returns. The field is responding, but the signal keeps shifting before a stable outcome can form. And this is where simplicity begins to reveal its real power. Because every layer of overthinking, doubt, comparison, and emotional urgency adds another variable to the system, another source of interference, another force pulling the signal away from coherence. But when those layers are removed, something interesting begins to happen. The system stabilizes, thoughts slow down, emotions settle. Identity becomes clearer, and once that coherence appears, the signal becomes strong enough for the field to respond consistently. This is why people who manifest easily often look almost effortless from the outside. They are not constantly adjusting their signal. They are not analyzing every emotion. They are not trying to control every outcome. Instead, they have removed enough internal noise for their frequency to stabilize naturally. And when the signal stabilizes, reality begins to reorganize around it. But there is still one deeper paradox hidden inside this process. A paradox that explains why many people unintentionally block their own manifestations. Because the very act of trying to manifest something can sometimes reinforce the one signal the field responds to most strongly. The signal of not having it yet. And once you understand this paradox, you begin to see why the shift from wanting to being changes everything. There is a paradox hidden at the center of manifestation that most people never notice. The harder you try to manifest something, the more distant it can appear. At first, this sounds counterintuitive. After all, we are taught that effort produces results. Work harder, focus more, try again. But manifestation does not operate under the same rules as physical effort. It operates through energetic correspondence. And effort, when it is driven by urgency, sends a very specific signal into the field. It says, "I don't have it yet." Every time someone checks to see if their manifestation has arrived, that signal is reinforced. Every time they repeat affirmations while internally hoping the situation will change, that signal becomes stronger. Every time they visualize something while secretly wondering if it will actually happen, the same message continues broadcasting. I am still waiting.
The quantum field does not interpret these signals as hope. It interprets them as information. And the most stable information it receives becomes the reality it reflects. This is why people can practice manifestation for months or even years without seeing meaningful change. Not because their desire is wrong, and not because the universe is withholding anything, but because their energetic state remains anchored in absence.
They are asking for something while simultaneously confirming that it is not here, and the field responds with perfect coherence. If the signal says not yet, the reflection becomes not yet. But something remarkable happens when that signal shifts. When a person stops broadcasting urgency, the entire dynamic changes. Instead of chasing an outcome, they begin stabilizing into a state where the desired reality no longer feels distant. A state where the identity associated with that reality begins to feel natural. This is the moment when manifestation stops being a pursuit and begins becoming a resonance. The difference may seem subtle, but energetically it is profound. Trying to manifest something keeps your attention on the gap between where you are and where you want to be. But embodying the frequency of that reality removes the gap entirely. The signal changes from, "I hope this happens," to something much quieter. Something much more stable. This is who I am becoming. And the quantum field responds to that stability very differently. Because reality does not reorganize around effort. It reorganizes around identity. Around the version of you that is consistently broadcasting the same frequency. This is why some people seem to attract opportunities, relationships, and resources almost effortlessly. Not because they are forcing reality to change, but because their internal state has already stabilized into alignment with what they experience. But to understand this shift more clearly, we need to explore a distinction that is rarely explained correctly. A distinction between two emotions that often look identical on the surface: desire and wanting. Because although they may feel similar, energetically, they are completely different frequencies. And understanding that difference changes everything about how manifestation actually works. At first glance, desire and wanting appear almost identical. Both seem to point towards something you would like to experience: a relationship, financial freedom, health, peace of mind. But energetically, these two states operate in completely different ways. Desire emerges from expansion. Wanting emerges from lack. Desire feels open. It carries curiosity, possibility, movement. There is excitement in it, but there is no pressure. The emotion says something like, "This would be beautiful to experience." Wanting, on the other hand, carries tension. It carries urgency. It carries the subtle belief that something is missing right now. Its emotional message sounds very different. I need this. And in the quantum field, that difference matters more than most people realize. Because the field does not respond to the object of your focus. It responds to the frequency behind it. When a person operates from desire, their energy remains expansive. There is space in their field. Their identity is not threatened by the absence of the outcome. But when someone operates from wanting, the signal contracts. Attention narrows. Emotion tightens. The nervous system enters a subtle state of lack. And the message transmitted into the field becomes very clear. This is not here yet. The field does not argue with that signal. It simply reflects it. To understand why, we can return to another idea from quantum physics: superposition. At the quantum level, all possible outcomes already exist as probabilities. Multiple versions of reality coexist simultaneously. Different timelines, different circumstances, different identities. The version of your life where abundance exists, the version where connection exists, the version where opportunities flow naturally. All of these possibilities are present in the field as potential states, but they do not move toward you. You do not pull them closer. You tune into them, just as a radio receiver tunes into a frequency that is already present in the environment. And that tuning process does not happen through force. It happens through alignment. When your internal state matches the frequency of a specific reality, the probability of that reality collapsing increases dramatically. Not because you forced it, but because you became coherent with it. This is why so many spiritual teachings emphasize a phrase that at first sounds abstract. You attract what you are. But even that phrase is often misunderstood, because becoming the version of yourself who already lives that reality cannot be simulated only through thoughts. You cannot mentally repeat, "I already have it," while emotionally vibrating tension, urgency, or fear. The field does not read your words. It reads your coherence. And coherence is emotional, physiological, energetic. When those elements align, the signal stabilizes. And once the signal stabilizes, reality begins responding in ways that often appear almost effortless. This is where manifestation becomes surprisingly simple. Not because the process is magical, but because the mechanism becomes clear. You are not convincing the universe. You are stabilizing your identity. And when identity stabilizes, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. The frequency of wanting dissolves, and a new state begins to emerge, a state that no longer asks for the reality, but naturally embodies it. And that state has a name: being. The moment manifestation truly begins to change is the moment a person shifts from wanting something to being the version of themselves who already lives it. This idea is often repeated in spiritual teachings, but rarely explained in a practical way, because many people interpret it as a kind of mental trick. They try to convince themselves that they already have what they desire. They repeat statements like, "I already have it. It is already mine." It is already done. But internally, nothing really changes. The emotional state remains the same. The body still feels the same tension. The mind continues wondering when the result will appear. And because the internal state has not shifted, the signal being transmitted into the field remains unchanged. The words say one thing, but the energy says another, and the quantum field always responds to the energy, not the script. This is why the transition from wanting to being cannot be forced through language alone. It is a shift in identity. Identity determines how you perceive reality, how you interpret opportunities, how you respond to uncertainty, and most importantly, what emotional state becomes normal for you. When someone identifies as a person who is still trying to achieve something, their nervous system remains in a state of pursuit. Their attention constantly scans for evidence. Is it working yet? Did something change? Is the manifestation getting closer? But the version of you who already lives that reality does not operate from that state. That version of you is not checking constantly, not questioning constantly, not waiting constantly. That version of you wakes up with a completely different emotional baseline. There is a sense of natural certainty, not arrogance, not force, just quiet stability. The kind of stability that comes when something already feels normal. Think about something in your life that already feels secure. You do not spend the entire day checking whether it will disappear. You do not constantly affirm that it exists. Your nervous system simply accepts it as part of your reality. That is the state manifestation requires, not obsessive focus, not emotional pressure, but familiarity. A calm recognition that the version of reality you are aligning with is already available. This is where identity becomes the real mechanism behind manifestation, because identity determines the frequency you naturally return to. If your identity is still anchored in someone who is searching, fixing, or chasing, your signal will continuously return to that frequency. But when identity begins shifting towards someone who already embodies the desired reality, the signal stabilizes. And when the signal stabilizes, the field begins to respond in a different way. Opportunities begin appearing more naturally. People respond differently. Synchronicities increase. Not because something magical suddenly started happening, but because the observer's signal has changed. And once the signal changes, the interaction with reality changes as well. However, many people struggle with this transition for a simple reason. Their nervous system has been conditioned to believe that results only come from effort, that success must feel difficult, that progress requires struggle. So when manifestation suddenly becomes simple, the mind resists it. And this resistance leads many people back into the very complexity that originally disrupted their signal. Which brings us to an important question. If simplicity creates coherence, why do so many people unconsciously resist it? If manifestation depends on coherence rather than effort, the natural question becomes simple. How do you stabilize that coherence in everyday life? Not through more techniques, not through constant monitoring, but through a small shift in how you begin your day. The first moments after waking are one of the most important energetic windows of the entire day. Your brain is still transitioning between slower brainwave states, moving from theta into alpha and eventually into beta. During this short period, your nervous system is far more receptive to emotional conditioning. In other words, the state you enter during those first minutes becomes the baseline frequency your body tends to carry throughout the day. Unfortunately, most people begin the day in separation. They reach for their phone, they check notifications, they remember unfinished tasks. They replay worries from the day before, and within seconds, their nervous system returns to the same familiar signal: stress, urgency, lack. But if manifestation depends on identity and coherence, those first moments can be used very differently. Instead of immediately entering the mental noise of the external world, you can stabilize your signal before the day even begins. The practice is simple, not as a ritual to force results, but as a way to allow your nervous system to remember a different frequency. You can think of it as establishing the already frequency, The first step is stillness. Before reaching for your phone, pause for a moment. Place one hand over your chest and close your eyes. Take a slow breath in, hold briefly, then exhale slowly. Repeat this 2 or 3 times. This is not about meditation. It is simply about slowing the system down. When breathing becomes slower and deeper, the body begins shifting out of a reactive stress response. Your brain waves soften, your attention moves inward, your field becomes quieter. The second step is declaration. Not a long list of affirmations, just 1 or 2 statements that represent the state you are choosing to embody. For example, today I move through life in alignment. I carry the frequency of abundance. I meet life from stability and clarity. The words themselves are not the most important part. What matters is the emotional tone behind them. They are not requests, they are recognitions. The third step is feeling. For a brief moment, allow your nervous system to experience what that state feels like. Not through effort, not through imagination alone, but through subtle embodiment. The calm confidence of someone who already belongs in that reality. This step may only take 90 seconds. But it allows the body to begin aligning with the identity you are stabilizing. And this is the key. You are not performing a technique to make something happen. You are establishing a signal your nervous system can return to throughout the day. When the body begins to recognize that frequency as familiar, the field around you gradually stabilizes. And when the signal stabilizes, the interaction between your consciousness and reality begins to change. But even with a practice this simple, many people unconsciously resist it. Not because it doesn't work, but because simplicity challenges something deeper. Something built into the identity most people have carried for years. The belief that meaningful change must always be complicated. There is something rarely discussed in manifestation conversations. Something that at first can feel uncomfortable to recognize. Many people are not actually afraid that their desires will never manifest. Deep down, they are afraid that they will. Because if reality truly began to shift, something else would also have to change. Their identity. For years, many people have built their sense of self around effort, around trying, around fixing problems, around constantly improving or correcting themselves. The mind becomes familiar with struggle. It becomes familiar with searching. And over time, that pattern becomes part of who a person believes they are. So when someone hears that manifestation may actually become simpler, that effort may not be the central mechanism. A subtle resistance appears. The mind immediately asks questions. If I stop trying so hard, won't everything fall apart? If I stop controlling the process, won't I lose progress? If it's really this simple, why have I struggled for so long? These questions do not come from logic alone. They come from the nervous system. Modern neuroscience shows that the brain continuously builds predictive models to maintain stability. It prefers patterns it already understands, even if those patterns involve stress, even if they involve struggle, because familiarity feels safe. When something new appears, especially something that challenges a long-held identity, the brain can interpret that change as uncertainty, and uncertainty activates caution. This is why many people unconsciously return to complexity. Not because complexity is effective, but because complexity feels familiar. Spiritual routines expand, practices multiply. People begin searching for new techniques, new protocols, new methods, all while the original signal remains the same: effort. But the version of you who already lives the reality you desire does not operate from that identity. That version is not defined by trying. That version is defined by coherence. She does not wake up wondering if reality will respond. She wakes up from a place of quiet certainty. Her energy is stable. Her nervous system is calm. Her identity is not searching for proof, because the emotional state already feels natural. This is the deeper reason simplicity becomes powerful, not because it removes action, but because it removes the identity built around constant effort. When that identity begins dissolving, something interesting happens. Your field becomes less reactive. Your attention becomes clearer. Your emotional state becomes more stable. And when those changes occur, the signal you transmit into the field becomes far more coherent. This is what many teachers refer to when they speak about living from the memory of the future, a concept popularized by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Instead of waiting for external evidence to change how you feel, you allow the emotional signature of that future to become your present baseline, not as imagination, but as identity. And when that emotional state stabilizes, your interaction with reality begins shifting naturally. Opportunities feel different. People respond differently. Decisions become clearer. Not because you forced outcomes to change, but because the observer has changed. And when the observer changes, the timeline that begins unfolding also changes. But there is one final piece to understand. One last shift that allows manifestation to stop feeling like a process and start feeling like a natural extension of who you are. And that shift has less to do with effort and more to do with something that many people misunderstand: detachment. At this point, something important becomes clear. Manifestation was never meant to be complicated. It only appears complicated when the signal is fragmented. When thoughts move in one direction, emotions in another, and identity remains anchored in an older version of reality. But once coherence appears, the process becomes remarkably simple. Because manifestation is not about forcing life to rearrange itself. It is about resonance. Resonance between the observer and the reality that already exists as a potential state. And resonance does not require constant effort. It requires consistency. Consistency in how you feel. Consistency in how you see yourself. Consistency in the emotional frequency you return to when the mind becomes quiet. This is where the idea of detachment often becomes misunderstood. Many people hear the word detachment and assume it means not caring, not wanting something, or pretending the desire no longer matters. But true detachment has nothing to do with indifference. It has everything to do with trust. When you are detached in the quantum sense, you are no longer emotionally dependent on the timeline. You are no longer asking the field for proof every day. You are no longer scanning reality to confirm whether the process is working. Instead, your identity has stabilized into something much quieter, something much more powerful, a knowing. Not a belief that requires reinforcement, not a hope that needs reassurance, but a state that simply feels natural. And when that state becomes your baseline, something interesting begins to happen. The pressure disappears, the urgency dissolves, the nervous system relaxes, and once that happens, the signal becomes extremely clear, because the frequency of needing is gone. The frequency of waiting is gone. All that remains is coherence. This is why many people experience sudden shifts after they stop obsessing about outcomes. Not because the universe suddenly decided to respond, but because their field finally stabilized. The observer stopped interfering with the signal, and once the signal stabilized, the field responded immediately. Because the quantum field does not follow your timeline, it follows your frequency. The moment your frequency stabilizes, the probabilities around you begin reorganizing. Opportunities appear. Conversations change direction. Unexpected connections happen. Reality begins moving in subtle but noticeable ways. Not because something external was manipulated, but because the observer has become coherent. And coherence always produces reflection. So as you move through your day, let your presence become the signal. Let your energy communicate what your words no longer need to explain. Walk through life with the posture of someone who no longer questions whether alignment is possible. Because alignment is not something you chase, it is something you remember. And once that memory becomes stable, manifestation stops feeling like a practice. It becomes the natural consequence of who you are being. And if something in this conversation resonated with you, If even a small part of it felt familiar, that may not be coincidence. It may simply be recognition. Recognition of something your awareness already understood. If you want to continue exploring these ideas, not just as information, but as experience, subscribe and stay connected with this space. Not just for more content, but for more clarity. Because this channel is not about techniques, it is about frequency. And once your frequency becomes coherent, reality has no choice but to respond.